Welcome, Gajan. Thank you for joining us. Before I hand it over to him, request you all to be please present till the end of the webinar and respond to the feedback form which would flash just after the session. Also visit webinar website for the detailed terms and conditions. With that, over to you, Gajan.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you, Manish. And thank you, everybody, for joining today. As Manish just talked about, today's session is going to be on how to move critical workloads to the public cloud. And we'll discuss some of the challenges that customers have experienced and how IBM has taken clients in the journey to moving some of those critical workloads. So before I kind of go into the specific details, I want to kind of take a step back and look at the landscape and look at where we are at today. We've all heard about, the wonders of public cloud and how everybody is moving workloads to the public cloud. But let's just pause for a second and just try to understand exactly where we are at today and what are some of the challenges that clients face. Now, if we pause for just a moment and look at the landscape today, what we'll find is not all workloads have moved to the cloud. I know from a market perspective, cloud is seen as that ultimate utopia. But although there's so many use cases for public cloud, although we're seeing a lot of clients building applications, if you look at the stats here, 500 million new applications created from 2018, and it's projected to grow until 2023. 90% of business innovations using public cloud services, 75% adoption of multi-cloud or hybrid cloud. But when you kind of couple all of those stats together, we're still accounting for a very, very small amount of those workloads that are currently within the enterprise that have shifted to the public cloud. And if you go by the 80-20 rule, this is effectively 20% of those workloads, a very small subset of a very large footprint that has shifted to the public cloud. Now, if we try to understand this a little bit deeper and say, what's preventing the migration of and modernization of some of these workloads and leveraging that in the public cloud, you'll find that a lot of clients, time and time again, talk about some of their unique workload requirements, some of their compliance requirements. They can't necessarily shift workloads to the cloud because they've got to consider security, they've got to consider location, they've got to consider things like network latency. The other challenge, and this is something that we're seeing a lot of, is this whole notion of multiple clouds and multiple platforms. I spent a lot of time talking to CIOs and many customers in the industry today, and a common theme emerges is that there's a lot of confusion around what type of public cloud should we look at, what landing zone is best for my applications in terms of cost profile, risk profile, as well as application dependencies. And that confusion then leads to this kind of inertia to say, okay, look, I can't move my workloads here because there is so much options here, and it's going to be very, very difficult from an operational perspective and a risk perspective as well. This choice also brings this notion of lack of skills. There are so many different technologies out there, so many different cloud platforms out there, that from a skill perspective, how do I as an organization invest my people, and what technologies should I focus on, and where do I invest in? And these are some of the common challenges that organizations grapple with. And as a result, you get this notion of, look, let me try and dabble in cloud. Let me try and use these capabilities to leverage some of the cloud, but I'm not going to shift some of my mission critical workloads to the cloud, right? Now, if we look at this from a slightly different lens, right? And if we look at this in terms of some of the cloud adoption challenges or considerations that organizations should look at when they're adopting public cloud, the first key challenge or consideration that needs to be looked at is around migration of legacy workloads. So we've all heard about, some of the customer channels or multi-customer channel websites and applications that have been built on the cloud. But what about my core systems, my core banking applications, or one of my core mission critical, HR systems or CRM systems that I'm using to support my internal users? Can I move those to the cloud? And most often than not, clients look at that and say, okay, the process of migrating those workloads to the cloud is too complex. Now, why is that? there's many reasons for that. Some of that could be related to the fact that you've got to worry about IP addresses. I'm running these applications on-prem. I've got my network structure. I've got my subnets. All of these applications are harmoniously interacting. What if I take this application and run it in the public cloud? Will it still operate the same? Do I need to worry about the network segments, and how do I actually define the networks in the public cloud? Will it work? Do I need to consider things like application latency? If I move these critical workloads, how will they behave in the public cloud? Performance considerations. These are all, security considerations, control considerations. So these are all things that clients need to grapple with when they're moving those legacy workloads, migrating those legacy workloads. So that itself creates that inhibition point. The second is really around app modernization complexity as well. So as I mentioned before, there's so many different technologies out there, and it's very easy for a client, and I've seen this happen a lot, where clients say, look, I'm going down a particular cloud platform choice, and I'm going to build my application natively to that public cloud provider. What inevitably happens, and a lot of clients have also told me, is they feel kind of ransom to that particular technology, and they're held ransom to that technology, which means that when they need to move out of that technology, it becomes incredibly expensive, incredibly challenging. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. The other key challenge that I hear a lot from customers is around the cost of cloud. Now, when you see the initial price of some of the cloud services, it looks incredibly cost-effective and value for money. I can buy a server in the cloud for $20 a month, for example, or I can pay for it per second. But a lot of times, customers don't take into consideration some of the ancillary costs associated to consuming those cloud services. There's cost of, obviously, the migration effort, which I talked about, which comes about because of a legacy migration effort. But there's also cost things like network charges. What about egress charges from data coming out of my cloud environment? What about interregional data traffic charges? These are all costs that add up. And then finally, in today's day and age, where clients are looking at digitization and building applications that are consumer-facing and interacting digitally to customers, especially because many of us are now working from home and many of us like to have that digital experience, we're getting a lot of exposure to external systems and external entities that potentially could be harmful to the organization. We've seen plenty of ransomware attacks happen recently. We've seen plenty of kind of security and cybersecurity issues occurring as well. So these are all some of the key considerations that clients now need to grapple with more than ever when they're adopting a cloud strategy. Now, the reason why I've talked about these four points, these considerations are directly impacting clients in their adoption of moving some of those critical workloads to the cloud. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time during the course of today's session on how does IBM mitigate some of these challenges? What's our strategy? What's our approach? And how does the competition do this today? And that's something that I want to spend a little bit of time on. So let's look at just kind of touching on this app modernization complexity piece in the middle here. Now, IBM understood that customers have choice, and there are plenty of ways where you can deploy applications, different platforms you can deploy applications on. And because we understood the need for clients to have that choice, we made a very, very large investment a few years ago of Red Hat. And what Red Hat has done is it's given us that foundational capability for us to build a whole lot of capabilities and software on top of that then can deploy on multiple different infrastructure technologies, whether it's IBM public cloud, whether it's our on-prem environments, whether it's edge computing, whether it's third-party multi-cloud environments as well. And this foundational layer, and if you look at IBM's strategy over the last 12 months, it's been about containerization and platform independence. So if you look at all of our middleware stack, where application stack, database stacks, integration stacks, automation stacks, security stacks, they've all been containerized on and running on this common foundational layer. And that's ultimately IBM's strategy. So you're going to see more and more of IBM being able to launch some of these multi-cloud capabilities that can be deployed on several technologies. And just a little example we're one of the market leaders in data and AI capabilities, data and AI services with our Watson AI capabilities. We've effectively decoupled the core functionality, our AI capabilities, from the underlying platform, and you can effectively deploy this capability on multiple technologies if you so wish, whether it's on-prem or natively on IBM public cloud as well. And that's the power that we have, and this is the strategy that IBM's bringing together. But of course, there's absolute value propositions, there's absolute value in deploying it natively on IBM Cloud, and there's also value in deploying OpenShift on IBM Cloud, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. But this is ultimately the long-term strategy that IBM is taking to build and decouple that dependency on the underlying platform. Now, just a little bit about IBM public cloud. I mean, we hear about all the major hyperscalers, and we're seeing that IBM is growing rapidly in the cloud space. But what is our innovation journey? What's our story? Where are we heading? Now, I talked about those key cloud inhibitors. Now, the key strategy that IBM has, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, is the fact that being an organization that has been partnering with customers for decades, we've been selling to enterprises for over a century, but over the last 50, 60 years, we've been selling very much into the enterprise segment. So we've taken a lot of the know-how that we've built in the enterprise segment, specifically around customers' needs for control and choice, and we've incorporated a lot of those enterprise-grade capabilities into our public cloud. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we do this and what are the key services that we're offering, and I'll even show you some of those key services in action as well. Just a kind of little side note to the enterprise-grade conversation, if you look at the far right here, we talk about enhanced availability SLAs as well, and I'll touch on this as well. Deploying services on IBM Public Cloud, we offer one of the highest SLA credits in the market today. So when we deviate from those SLAs, the 99.99% or 99.9% in our non-HA deployments, we provide service level credits for deviating from those SLAs. And I'll talk about some of those SLA payouts later on, but that's part of the value that we bring to enterprise customers. The second key pillar, which is absolutely critical, is around security leadership as well. So I'll talk a little bit more about this, but I just want to give you a view and a sense of what we've done. We've been selling, for example, mainframe technologies to banks and enterprises for many, many years. Now, some of the core capabilities that our banking customers and customers who have used our mainframe technologies are accustomed to is security. Mainframe systems are being secured using enterprise-level TPMs, security key modules. We've basically taken some of those TPM technologies available in our System Z mainframe systems and incorporated that into our public cloud. So today, we have the highest hardware security capabilities, hardware security encryption capabilities for our key management services in the public cloud in the industry. In fact, it is the highest rated today, FIPS 140-2 level 4 encryption available on IBM public cloud. The other key component, and this is something that people may not know this, is that we're a big proponent of open source, and we've contributed heavily to the open source community. We've adopted a lot of open source capabilities into our core technologies and as well as into our public cloud as well. In fact, we're running the largest Kubernetes cluster globally. About 1,000 clients are running on our Kubernetes environment with over 19,000 clusters today. And we've also contributed to the open source community with open source distributions like Razy, Knative, and Istio, and we're continually adding to that capability as well. Now, just a little bit of a point of view here as well. These are kind of a complete view of all of the different services on IBM Public Cloud. We have over 190 odd services, and I'll double click on some of these and talk about how these fit into that enterprise migration strategy that customers will embark on. Another key point that I want to make is our coverage. One of the key points to make is we have multi-zone regions and availability zones across the globe. In India, in Australia, in the US, in South America, in Europe, across the globe. Now, something very, very critical to talk about and highlight. you would have remembered in my probably my second slide when I talked about, or third slide when I talked about the inhibitors to adopting public cloud, one of the inhibitors was around network costs as well, the hidden costs that customers that typically incur. Now, something worth highlighting is that IBM is the only provider to offer inter-regional data traffic completely free of charge. What that means is you could deploy workloads in Chennai, and you could replicate the data to, say, the US or to Japan or to Sydney or to Europe, anywhere in Europe, and that replication cost, that the cost of data traffic between our regions is completely free of charge. Now, this is an absolutely compelling value proposition, particularly when you're building multi-regional deployments across the globe and you're looking at disaster recovery and business continuity solutions globally. Another key point to note is that we also offer free egress charges to some of our cloud services. So it's accumulated free egress, and I'll talk about what that means from a cost perspective later as well. So when you add up all these elements, it becomes a far more transparent cost model when you're consuming services on IBM Public Cloud. Now, just to kind of give you a very, very high-level view of the various ways in which you can deploy applications, and I'll relate this back to the enterprise migration story that I started with. If you look at all the cloud providers, there's different platform points of view, different ways in which you can deploy applications. Now, IBM has taken a slightly different approach to public cloud than a AWS or an Azure or Google. So we made an acquisition about 5-6 years ago, actually a little over 6 years ago, of SoftLayer. And what SoftLayer gave us is the ability to provision dedicated, isolated bare metal services as a cloud consumption model on demand. So we were one of the first to come out with a bare metal, dedicated, isolated system for clients who wanted isolation and for IO-intensive workloads. If you look at the public cloud providers as well, if you look at the AWSs, the Googles, the Azures, the approach was slightly different. They took a little bit more of a scale-out, multi-tenanted, shared infrastructure model, where they had multiple environments, multiple customers deployed on the same set of infrastructure, and they really capitalized on the virtual machine market, and that's kind of what brought about the whole notion of the popularity of public cloud, especially with AWS. IBM also offers that model as well, but we find for enterprise customers, especially customers in regulated industries that need that level of control, need that level of isolation, the bare metal capabilities are absolutely essential. And what we found is that most of the hyperscalers out there in the market, the AWSs and now Azure, are all moving towards a dedicated, isolated option as well. In fact, AWS, and I'll show you later on, has recently announced a bare metal option on their cloud, but you'll see the differences in the approach when I take you through the demonstration later on. When it comes to containers, we're seeing a huge flux of customers now moving heritage workloads and then converting those VM-based workloads to a containerization framework and leveraging microservices. And of course, Kubernetes is at the forefront of this. Now, IBM, as well as the other public cloud providers, offer container-based environments as well on their clouds. Now, we've extended that more. We're offering additional capabilities, and also we offer OpenShift natively on IBM Public Cloud as well. Now, if you go further to the left here, this is where we start to talk about instant runtimes, where customers don't necessarily want to worry about managing their underlying container or underlying virtual machine or underlying bare metal. They just want to deploy code, and they want to be able to run that code. And IBM has that ability to be able to deploy instant runtimes on IBM Public Cloud. And then finally, we've got Cloud Functions. I mentioned this earlier as well, that we've been a big contributor to the open source community. And one of the aspects of how we've contributed is in the notion of Cloud Functions. IBM Cloud Functions is based on Knative, which is part of the open source community. Customers who build on Knative have the ability to deploy serverless environments on IBM Public Cloud, but also can port those serverless applications to open source systems that are being deployed using Knative. So you can see that we've really thought about the end-to-end aspects from the abilities, from a customer's ability to be portable. And that's fundamentally the value proposition that we bring to our customers. Now, what we've also done, if you look at virtual machines, is we understand that customers need the ability to migrate workloads seamlessly to the cloud. And as a result, we were the first to partner with VMware to build a like-for-like capability in IBM Public Cloud so that customers can seamlessly move VM workloads to the public cloud. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but there is absolutely unique value propositions of why IBM for VMware, and you'll get to see some of the key differentiation points later on. Another key point that I want to talk about is power. We've also recently announced power on IBM Cloud as well. And again, this is because of the many sets of customers who are running power workloads on-prem. They need that workload symmetry to be able to migrate and deploy workloads in the public cloud. So you can see the notion of workload symmetry and being able to migrate workloads to the public cloud as a critical requirement that many customers are having. And that's one of the reasons why we're trying to make the experience of migrating those workloads as seamless as possible. Okay, let me just skip this. Now, the platform is only one part of the equation. The most important aspect is really to sit down and understand the strategy that you need to take. Depending on that strategy, you can make a decision on what is the ideal landing zone for your environment. So I'm not going to get up here and say that IBM Public Cloud is the only public cloud that you need to look at. Most customers need to look at a multi-cloud strategy, and there's pros and cons of different cloud technologies, and I'll talk about some of those pros and cons later. But the key notion to know about is, as an organization, there is a process that we go through to help our customers decide and determine what needs to happen with their applications and where those applications need to be deployed. So we go through a rapid assessment process where we iteratively look at the applications, look at certain technical requirements, look at financial requirements, look at the operational model, including tooling, and then we can make a decision to a customer and say, okay, do we retire the application? Do we retain the application, or do we replace the application? Now, if we're retaining the application, where should that application land? Do we take it from an existing VM environment, move it to a VM environment in the cloud? Do we take it from a physical environment, move it to a virtual environment in the cloud? Do we need to modernize that application and containerize it? Or do we need to take that application and build it on cloud native? And these are some of the decision criteria and decision points that we as IBM do when we have that conversation with the customer. So it's absolutely critical that once you go through that decision point, you choose the right landing zone based on your cost profile, your technical requirements, and the tooling requirements that you have when you're making that decision. So there is no one platform that will satisfy all requirements. You've really got to think about it based on the application profile that you have and based on some of the decision points that I talked about. Now, a slightly different way of spinning this and slightly different way of looking at this as well. So the way IBM has structured our cloud migration and multi-cloud strategy is to break it up into 4 key pillars, where we provide advisory services on moving to the cloud, we move workloads to the cloud, we build workloads in the cloud, and we manage those workloads on the cloud. And we have a number of services strategies to address each of these different phases. Now, today, I'm going to focus a little bit more on the move piece and the build piece. And this is where I'm going to talk about the value proposition that IBM Public Cloud provides to our customers. So let's focus a little bit more on moving. So when we're talking about moving workloads to the cloud, what are some of the challenges that customers face? And I talked about some of those challenges earlier. The first really is around legacy workload migration. As I mentioned, it's not easy to migrate legacy workloads. There's so many considerations you need to think about on how that environment will work like in the public cloud. Now, IBM's strategy, and if you saw the earlier chart that I showed you, the earlier slide that I showed you on all the different platform options you've got, one thing we've done is we've tried to replicate and create what I call workload symmetry. So if you're running VM workloads on-prem, we want to make sure that we run identical VM workload capabilities and flexible VM workload options in the public cloud. If you're running Power on-prem, we want to be able to match that same Power capabilities in the public cloud. if you're running your workloads on bare metal and it hasn't been virtualized, we want to be able to give you that choice as well. So that simplification of workload portability is critical. The other aspect is around application modernization. And this is where we want to give customers the choice to be able to modernize their application, but still retain portability and use common tooling across different different platforms. And that's why we're making a really, really strong push for OpenShift as that layer to support that application modernization journey. And then most importantly, even more important than workload migration, the starting point for any cloud migration strategy is really around data migration, moving the data. Data can be the most stickiest part of the story. So we offer a simplified data portability outcome through the use of IBM's Cloud Object Storage capabilities. So these are kind of the key technology enablers to support that migration to the public cloud story. And I'm going to focus a little bit on some of these key technologies, specifically VMware, Power, a container strategy with OpenShift, and also touch on object storage as well. So a little bit about VMware and IBM Public Cloud. So what we've effectively done, and I'll show you this in the demonstration, is we have provided customers the ability to go through in the IBM Cloud Console and pick and choose the elements and provision an entire software-defined data center environment based on VMware. And as a result of doing that, we can make the whole process of migrating VM workloads on-prem to the cloud a lot more seamless. And we use technologies like VMware's hybrid cloud extension capabilities to do that. And we've seen many of our customers benefit from that. We've got American Airlines, who's had a lift and shift strategy. They're able to migrate a lot of their workloads seamlessly into the cloud. We've also had customers provision VMware environments so that they can consolidate their existing DC footprint. So migrate and then consolidate. We've also had customers who've looked at this migration strategy as a phase to then look at app modernization as well. So we've had customers migrate to VMware and then containerize their applications because they already get the benefits of cloud economics, migrate those workloads and modernize those workloads to a container-based environment. So let me pause here for a second and just get into a demonstration of what this can actually look like. So when I for those of you who've never actually gone into the IBM Cloud Console and actually played around with it, I'd urge you guys to do that. So the first thing I'd recommend everybody to do, is do a search post the session on IBM Cloud, and you can basically get access to the IBM Cloud. You can sign up for the IBM Public Cloud. Once you sign up for the IBM Public Cloud, you can log in and you've got access to all of the different services that I talked about. And I showed you in the slide previously over 190 services that are running on IBM Public Cloud that can be accessed through the catalog. Now, I mentioned all of the different platform options where you can deploy applications. Now, when you click on Compute, you get a quick view of all of the different options where you can deploy. So I can deploy workloads in a virtual machine, similar to what you would expect with, say, an EC2 or an Azure virtual machine. I can go and deploy it directly on a bare metal server. And actually, let me pause here and just show you this for a second, right? Bare metal servers, because many customers can't believe you can actually provision a bare metal server on demand in the cloud. And this is something that you can do. So with IBM Public Cloud, you can actually go in and choose your bare metal option. You can choose whether you want hourly billing, monthly billing, or a long-term contract, and you can choose where you want to deploy your workload. So you can pick the data center that you want to deploy this, and you can also choose the different options. I want a single core, a dual core, a SAP certified HANA system, a VMware certified system, and you can see the pricing on the right-hand side reflected. And once you've gone through the whole process, you can just accept and create and provision the service. And usually the provisioning of a bare metal server can take a few hours, but there's also fast provisioning options which allow you to provision this within minutes. Now, this is something that's very, very unique. The options, the configuration options are absolutely unique to IBM. Now, let me just stop here and just show you what this looks like from another public cloud provider. So again, I'm not trying to disparage any other public clouds, but I just want to give you a view of the differences in the approach that different cloud providers have taken. So if you go to AWS's management console, so this is AWS, right? And if you have a look at EC2, so virtual servers. Now, AWS has also recently made available the ability to provision bare metal servers as well. So I'm just going to go into the console here, and I'm going to go in and provision a bare metal server on AWS. So AWS has these notions of AMIs. I'm going to pick a machine. Now, you'll see that these are all the different options that AWS offers. Now, if I just click on metal here, you can see anything with a .metal at the end is a bare metal server that AWS offers. And you can see that right now, in this particular region, AWS offers about 10 bare metal options. Now, what you'll see is that each of these options are fixed configurations. These are 96 cores, 384 gigs, fixed storage, and you've got these fixed configuration options. Now, just compare and contrast that with the approach that we've taken. We've given multiple bare metal options, multiple processor configurations, SAP and VMware options, and you get to choose where you deploy this on. So there's almost several thousand permutations and combinations of memory, storage, and compute options that you can provision. And why is this important? This is important to enterprise customers because they need choice. They want flexibility in how they configure these systems. And that's the level of flexibility that we offer. Now, just the reason why I kind of took a break here is I want to go back to VMware here very quickly and just give you a point of view on VMware-based workloads here as well. So as I mentioned, you have the choice of deploying a physical server, or you have the choice of deploying a virtual server. Now, if I go into, let me just click on this little ribbon here and just show you, this is another way of accessing those services. I'll click on VMware here. You'll get to see the VMware-based offering that IBM has built on IBM Cloud. And let me just quickly show you that here. So what you'll find is that the VMware-based offering on IBM Cloud is a complete software-defined data center stack, which allows you to deploy either a shared or a dedicated environment running VMware. So if I go in and click on VMware Solutions Dedicated, I can go in and choose all the different combinations of components that I need to spin up a software-defined data center stack running on VMware. So I can go in here and choose my vSphere option. I can choose the type of NSX that I use, whether it's NSXV, NSXT. I can bring my own licenses. I can choose multiple bare metal configuration options, even SAP HANA instances running on VMware. And I can basically pick and choose the various configuration options and then provision that environment. I can also add on optional services as well. So for example, if I'm building a disaster recovery solution where I've got my on-prem workload running VMware and I want to replicate those workloads to the cloud for business continuity disaster recovery, I have a choice of using industry-leading backup software like Veeam or DR solutions like Zerto. And I can also do things like security and compliance using technologies like HITRUST and Cavionics. So there's so many options that are available when you're provisioning a software-defined data center using VMware. Now, again, let me just pause here and just give you a point of view on how this works from a competitive standpoint. So as I mentioned before, many of our competitors are now announcing VMware-based solutions as well. VMware has also announced a solution with AWS. Now, this is basically the VMware on AWS offering. And if I just go into this very quickly and just show you, let's just pick, I think Chennai should be here somewhere. Mumbai is where AWS's data center is. You can basically see that there are only two different configuration options. In fact, for production, you don't even have the i3N. You have the i3 Metal, one server type with a fixed core, fixed memory, fixed option, and basically the additional add-on of VMware Site Recovery, and that's it. So the point I'm trying to make is, from an enterprise customer perspective, customers are looking for flexibility. Customers are looking for choice to be able to match what they're currently running on-prem. So I speak to many, many customers who say, look, I have a high memory application that requires a high CPU utilization, or I have a low memory application with high CPU utilization. You can start to mix and match all the different configuration options depending on what you're after based on what is available in IBM Public Cloud. And that level of flexibility is what's absolutely critical for clients, right? So that's just to give you a little bit of a flavor of our value proposition around VMware. So that's something that's unique to IBM. Another key value prop, and these are for many of our customers who are running Power workloads on-prem, and they want to be able to move to Power in public cloud. Now, Power itself, the Power architecture, provides a lot higher consolidation in power per footprint than many of the x86-based environments out there in the market today. And Power definitely gives a lot of value propositions to customers, especially when they're running existing Power workloads on-prem. Now, again, when it comes to Power, we haven't forgotten about flexibility and choice for customers. And I want to give you another example of what I mean by flexibility and choice. So let me just go in and show you Google Cloud. So from a competitive standpoint right now, Google Cloud is the only cloud apart from IBM that offers a Power option on for IBM public cloud. So they offer a Power option on Google. And I'm just going to, while we're waiting for Google to load, so this is Google's console here, right? And if I just search for Power, you'll see IBM Power Systems for Google Cloud show up. So this is the Power Systems option on Google Cloud. Now, before I go into that, let me quickly show you what does Power on IBM Cloud look like. So if I go back into Catalog, right, and if I click on Services, and if I click on Compute, you can see again all the different options. So if I click on Power Systems Virtual Server, I can basically go into the system and provision a Power System VM in the cloud. Now, I've already done one before, and if I just click on Resource List here, you can actually see the Power Systems Virtual Server that's already been provisioned. Let me just quickly go in here. So this is the Power Systems environment that I've already provisioned earlier. Okay. Now, let me go in and provision a Power VM, right? So these are for customers who have Power on-prem and they want to provision a Power virtual machine in the cloud. And this comes back to the whole notion of mission-critical workloads. Many banking applications, many core systems are still running on Power environments on-prem. And you can see with IBM, you can go through, choose. So for example, DB Power VM, okay, and choose the number of instances I want to deploy. I won't go into too much of the details in the Power environment here, but I just want to say, look, I want to go and provision a Power server, and I want to choose the number of cores that I want to provision, the number of memory, and then you can go in and hit agree, and then create the Power virtual machine, and it'll charge you per month. So that's pretty much how easy it is to provision. And once you provision the Power VM, and here's an example of a Power VM that's provisioned, you can very easily log into that system as well. So here is the Power VM that I've already provisioned. Just to show you how easy it is to provision, to log in, I'm going to log into the system here. So I go into SSH -I VPC. Let me just hold on, just bear with me for 1 second. Okay. Oh, I'm not sharing my terminal screen here, so some of you guys might not actually see that. Let me just share that screen here. I've just realized that, my apologies. So I'm just going to SSH into this environment just to show you how easy it is to set up. And choose the IP address 52.117.41.38. And you can very quickly SSH into that Power system, and you can start to run workloads on that Power environment. So there you go. So that's how easy it is to provision and set up a Power system, a Power VM, or a normal virtual machine based on x86, or a bare metal environment on IBM Public Cloud, right? So let me just go back. So you can, before I do that, actually, let me go back to the Google example I gave you. So this is Google's option, Power Systems option for public cloud, and you can see here Google's taken a slightly different approach to IBM Public Cloud. So you saw in the demonstration I gave you before, you were able to go in and pick and choose the number of cores, the amount of memory, the amount of storage that you wanted to provision. With Google, you don't have that option. You have the option of basically picking from a plan, and when you provision the plan, you basically get these entitled amount of compute resources. There's no ability to go in and slice and dice specifically what you want to provision. So you start with the plan, you provision it, you get billed for that plan, and then you can start to provision on top. A very different approach to the way IBM has approached it. But the common theme that I want to mention is that the way IBM has approached this is we keep thinking about the way a customer would want to have that flexibility and choice that they currently have on-prem. They want to be able to replicate that same capability in the public cloud, and that's effectively how we've done this on the public cloud as well, providing that level of flexibility as well, rather than a one-size-fits-all approach. Now, the other key point I want to take is as well, so we have many customers now looking at containerization strategies as well, moving from a VM-based workload environment to a containerized environment, taking advantage of some of that containerized capability. So on IBM Public Cloud, we offer native Kubernetes, which we call IKS, which is equivalent to EKS from AWS, or AKS from Azure, or GKE from Google. It's a Kubernetes framework. But what we've realized is that customers want the ability to not just deploy containers, but they want the tooling associated to that. They want the ease of management of that Kubernetes-based environment. And that's where OpenShift is a very, very key capability that we offer in our public cloud. So if I just step out of this presentation here for a second and just quickly go back into the IBM Cloud demo here, click on Catalog, you can see right here, if you go to Compute, OpenShift will be displayed here as well. So you've got OpenShift, my apologies, it's in the containerization option here. You'll see OpenShift, Red Hat OpenShift on IBM Cloud. So if I just click on the ribbon here, and I'm just going to show you OpenShift here, you'll see a running environment of OpenShift, which you can very quickly provision on IBM Public Cloud. But once you provision the OpenShift environment, you've got access to all of the different catalog services that are available on OpenShift. So you can start to build applications on OpenShift that then allow you to move your application workloads from an OpenShift environment running on IBM Public Cloud, or run it on-prem on an OpenShift environment, and then move that to IBM Public Cloud seamlessly. And you have that interoperability of workloads between on-prem and public cloud. And that portability is absolutely critical for many of our clients as well, right? And finally, the other key aspect to consider when moving to the public cloud is obviously data. And data is absolutely critical when you're looking at a migration strategy, especially when you're looking at moving critical workloads. One of the recommendations I make to customers all the time is when you're starting to look at a migration strategy, start with your data first, migrate that data first. And from an IBM perspective, the easiest way to migrate your data into the cloud is to look at an object storage technology. And IBM Cloud has a leading object storage technology based on a technology that IBM acquired a few years ago, which is a market-leading object storage technology called CleverSafe. And what we've done on our public cloud is we are offering customers multiple storage tiers, ranging from a standard storage tier all the way through to a very, very low-cost storage tier for archive data. Now, some of the key use cases that we see customers look at adopting public cloud object storage technologies, of course, is they want to reduce their on-prem backup costs. So they want to move some of that on-prem backup environments to the cloud. They may want to archive data for long-term. They may want to move the data for data analytics purposes. And of course, they want to move it to a staging environment in an object storage environment for a cloud migration strategy as well. And just to give you a quick demo of this as well, if I go back into IBM Public Cloud here, and let's just go back into the catalog. So these are all the services. If I click on services, and click on storage, you can see all of the different storage options available. And there's IBM, IBM Object Storage here, Object Storage. So that when you click on Object Storage, you can very quickly go in and provision a object storage instance in the cloud. So I've already created one before. And let me just very quickly demonstrate the value proposition of this example here. So if I click on storage, here is a object storage bucket that I've already provisioned. Oops. So a very similar concept exists on other public clouds. AWS has S3, Google has their blob storage, and so does Azure. Very similar concept, but the price points are very, very low cost on IBM Cloud Object Storage. So I've created a bucket here to store all my backup data, right? So here's a bucket that I've created to store my backup data. I can very quickly use a backup application. In this example, I'm using Cloudberry Backup, and I can very quickly back up the data to the bucket and retrieve data from the bucket as well. I'm just mindful of the time, so I'm not going to go through in detail and show you the demo, but what you can do is very quickly back up your data or migrate the data to the object storage repository in the cloud. Once it's there, you can then use it as a landing zone for then different application use cases as well. Okay. Right. Now, let me just quickly go through here. So we talked about migrate to the cloud. Once the workloads are in the cloud, we've got to think about building for the cloud as well. So as I mentioned before, our key strategy for customers, particularly when customers are limited on skills, is to leverage common tooling and common capabilities, and hence why OpenShift is an absolutely key strategy for IBM. And Cloud Paks, which is our containerization strategy for our middleware solutions, are also a key strategy for our clients. Similarly, when you look at cloud-native capabilities, let me just drop out of here as well. For customers who want to leverage the cloud-native capabilities that are available on IBM Public Cloud, there are a range of services that are available that customers can leverage. So as I mentioned before, there are over 190 cloud-native services ranging from the AI machine learning services, our Watson services, all the way through to core database services that are available where you want to build your applications natively. But as I mentioned before, it's great to build cloud-native services on a public cloud, but you've got to consider application portability as well. And that's why for those customers who want to worry about that portability, leveraging a technology like OpenShift becomes absolutely critical. Okay. I'm mindful I've been talking for a long time, but I do want to kind of pause here and ask questions as well. So rather than just carry on, I'm sure there's a lot we can talk about. I'm happy to kind of break this up. Let me pause here and open this up, and let me just have a look at the chat and see if there's any specific questions that we may want to answer, or if you guys want to focus on any particular aspects here in more detail. Okay. So let me just have a look at the Q&A here. So one of the questions that I got asked is both ingress and egress, are they free? Ingress is free with most cloud providers, including IBM. Egress is also free with IBM, but there are obviously conditions around that. So actually, that's a very, very good question, and let me just quickly explain that in more detail. So with IBM, we offer egress, 5 terabytes of free egress per month per server that you're provisioning. In some other regions and some other availability zones like North America, you have about 20 terabytes of free egress. Depending on how much infrastructure you provision or how much virtual machines, you can cumulatively add up the number of egress that you provision. So just to give you an example here, let me go to Microsoft Azure pricing calculator just for a second here, just to show you what that cost looks like, right? Oops, what is this? Let me close that. Microsoft Azure pricing calculator. All right, and let me just show you here very quickly how these costs can add up. So if you go to networking and if you go to bandwidth, oops, click on view. So if you were to go and provision, let's look at Central India, and we decided to provision 5 terabytes of data transfer out. That equates to about $613 per month in egress traffic that you would have to pay if you were to deploy a workload on Azure, example. AWS is also similar. I think AWS for 5 terabytes of egress, it's about 480. So from an IBM standpoint, that egress traffic that is cumulative is free of charge for our customers. So 5 terabytes is free per server. So if you add 10 servers, it's 10 times the 5 terabytes, so 50 terabytes free. So that's an absolutely key value proposition that we offer our customers. Let me open up to additional questions here. Okay, I think there was some more questions here on egress. Okay, let me just go back to the Q&A panel. Okay, is VMware an IBM product? No. So the VMware offering, what we've done is we've used VMware's core capabilities. So VMware as a vendor provides virtualization software, but what we've done is we've automated the deployment of VMware technologies on IBM Public Cloud. We've made it a lot more easier for clients to deploy VMware-based environments in IBM Public Cloud. Another question that came through, private cloud or public cloud, which is better option for organizations looking for going to cloud? Now, it really depends on your requirements as well. So as I mentioned before, in terms of that strategy that I drew up here, so if you go back to this previous slide here, there's no one strategy that addresses the requirements. Sometimes some workloads need to be as close as possible to your users as possible. So adopting public cloud may not be the most feasible option. You may have security considerations. There may be specific regulatory requirements. There may be specific technical requirements why you can't move that to the public cloud. In those cases, for example, going to a provider or vendor that offers the on-prem capabilities but gives you that private cloud consumption on demand model would be absolutely a good option. So hence a private cloud deployment model. But in other cases where you're looking for cost benefits and you want to be able to reduce the cost very quickly and you want to be able to scale up and down, you have workload requirements that are very variable, then adopting public cloud will be an absolutely great option for those clients as well. Can AS400 data be transferred to cloud? Can AS400 be a virtual machine? So the answer is absolutely. So our strategy, so AS400, so our AS400 environment, so we offer both iSeries and AIX on IBM Public Cloud. We leverage the object storage technology that I mentioned before. So you can actually take a snapshot of an image that you're running on-prem and then migrate that workload to the public cloud into an object storage repository. And then you can mount that object storage repository with your iSeries environment and provision that environment and load that virtual machine up. So absolutely, the answer is yes. Okay. Is it possible to transfer AS400 work to cloud? Yes, it is. So as I mentioned, we've got a number of clients who are right now looking at deploying some of their core on-prem AIX or iSeries workloads in the public cloud. And one of the things that they're looking to do is using it for test and dev workloads. So right now, if I go back, since we were asking a few questions about our iSeries and Power environments here. So if I just go back into Compute, Power Systems Virtual Server here, actually let me click on the resource list. Okay, we see many customers leverage the environment for scale up and down requirements. So with our environment, you can actually dynamically scale up the number of cores, scale down the number of cores as required. And you can do that programmatically. All of the different services that I've listed here are available on demand and accessible through APIs as well, through the command line. So you can actually script and set up policies that scale up and down the core counts as and when you need it on demand. Okay, so let me just quickly go through. There was another question that came. What are IBM's licensing requirements? So depending on the services, so most of the services that we list here, the licensing is offered with the cloud subscription as well. So for example, with the VMware option here, so if you go to compute and click on a VMware-based options here. So if you click on VMware and you provision a VMware-based option, that includes the VMware-based licenses if you choose to buy it from IBM as a subscription model. If you want to, and if you have your own VMware licenses, you can actually bring those VMware licenses to the cloud, right? That's one. The second key aspect is around some of the other services as well. Say, for example, you want to provision virtual machines, right? So if I click on catalog and you wanted to go in and provision a virtual server, for example, we include the operating system licenses with the subscription as well. So if you go in here, you can basically provision a Microsoft-based operating system, and that's included in the price as a subscription model per month as well. Now, for some third-party solutions, for example, if you're provisioning, so if I click here, let me just go back into catalog here. If I click on software, we have a whole range of third-party software options providers as well, right? For some of these third-party providers, some of the licensing you have to source from the provider. They're not included with the stack, but that's more specific to some of the third-party software that's part of our cloud catalog. But most of the native services that are available with IBM Public Cloud, all of the licenses are included, and you don't have to worry about purchasing that separately. So I had a question here. Can you please explain about Power System? Look, what I showed you before, I could spend a little bit more time, but I think what it may be worthwhile, if you do perhaps post this session, send us an email. What we could do is we can schedule a more detailed session to take you through the Power and IBM Cloud offering, what exactly it does, how it works, what are the key differentiation points in a subsequent session. So I'm happy to kind of schedule that. So feel free to schedule and send us an email, or we'll contact you, and we can kind of run through that in a bit more detail. Okay.
Thank you so much, Gajan, for taking questions in so detail. Unlike our other webinars, we don't get time, but I could see that you have taken them and shown them on the various slides. So you have more questions in the Q&A window?
Okay, so yeah, I had a couple of questions. What is the use of Cloud Foundry? I can take that very quickly. I know we've reached the top of the hour. So Cloud Foundry is basically the ability for us to deploy it's a platform offering where you can deploy code. So rather than actually managing the underlying infrastructure, you can basically deploy. So if I go in here, let's search for Cloud Foundry. It's similar to, if you're familiar with services like App Engine from Google, where as a developer, you don't want to worry about deploying the underlying applications. You don't want to worry about how these servers work, how does networking work. All you want to do is take your code, I write my code in Java and just deploy the code on IBM Public Cloud. That's basically what Cloud Foundry offers. You're able to write your code and just deploy it directly on IBM Public Cloud, and it just works. And that's effectively what that is.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Gajan, so much. So in the interest of time, we have already